All right, welcome to Quixotic Heights, where stories transcend boundaries, ideas ignite transformation, and the human spirit dares to reach beyond the ordinary. I'm your host, Amy M. Lee, author and founder of Quillhawk Publishing, a hybrid publishing company dedicated to amplifying diverse voices, one story at a time. And today I am honored to be joined by an extraordinary guest, Bill Bernhardt, an award-winning author of more than 60 books, a master of legal thrillers, and a passionate advocate for writers around the world. From best-selling novels to shaping the next generation of storytelling through WriterCon, his impact on the literary landscape is both profound and far-reaching. We'll be diving into his latest work, The Superman Wars, A Battle of Truth, Justice, and an American Icon, and dissecting his career. With that, welcome, Bill, to Quixotic Heights. How are you today?
I'm great, Amy. How you doing?
I am doing good.
Thanks
I'm
for
so
having
excited
me
to have
on.
you. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. I love you what you're wearing, Superman.
Well, as I've said before, this is my 67th published book, and most of them didn't really lend themselves to cosplay. I mean, I guess I could wear a suit, and I probably did for all those lawyer books, but, this is Superman. I'm not going to let this opportunity go by.
Heck yeah, this is perfect. I love it. So let's get started. I really want to dive first into your childhood and just talk a little bit about what life experiences little Bill Bernhard had before he became this amazing 67 books published author.
Well, it's funny. I had to smile when you just called me Little Bill because that's exactly what people called me when I was a kid in Midwest City because my father's name was also Bill. Actually, even when a few years back, wanting to keep an eye on my folks, I moved back here and I'm not a kid anymore, but they still call me Little Bill. So some things never die. Or school chums will say Billy. But for the grown-ups, or I guess we're all grown-ups now, but you know what I mean. Little Bill was the thing. Even whatever, I'm technically William Gene Bernhardt II, except there was never a first because that wasn't really my dad's name. But now I'm probably giving you more information that you really wanted to have. I was a nerdy kid, just like probably you and everybody else. I loved books. I was reading ridiculously early. I don't know why. I don't think it means I'm special or brilliant or anything. I just liked books from the get-go. And although I had a lovely home, grew up in, and was in no danger of starving. There were not a lot of books around the house. I had two considerably older sisters. They're not going to appreciate that at all, but they're by a gap, two older sisters, so I could find a few Nancy Drews, and maybe that's why I write mysteries. But fortunately, the saving grace was that they put in a small community library and it was easy walking distance. And this is back in the days when, kids actually walked to school. And I did. And so I could turn right and go home or turn left and go to the library. And you can guess what I did most days. It was a haven, a safe place, and a wonderful place where I was exposed to so many books. And one librarian in particular, I still remember her so well, took an interest in this nerdy kid, with the lisp and the speech impediment and painfully shy and scrawny and poor in sports. But man, in the library, that was the place. And she'd recommend things and show me around and say, "Oh, you're done with that room. Let's move on to, a more grown up room and read some different stuff." And I got a
Mm.
wonderful exposure to really kind of the best of everything, which has made me who I am today. I read the best of everything. I'm not snobby about it at all. I just love good writing.
I love it. So fast forward, you went to law school, you became an
True.
attorney. What field or what area of law did you go into?
Well, I was a trial lawyer, so that's the litigation department. But of course, you can litigate a lot of different things. I joined a big firm in Tulsa, and we were doing mostly commercial litigation, as you might imagine, a lot of oil and gas work. And I did that for about 10 years because, oddly enough, even though I'd known since I was 7 that I wanted to be a writer,
Hmm.
it's easier to know that than to make it happen. And I was beginning to realize that it wasn't just about being well read and writing all the time and putting it in the mail. Some things just take time. And as I bet you've heard me say before, this is a field where talent's a good thing to have, not that uncommon. What is uncommon is perseverance, the ability to stick to it when you're getting rejected over and over again, and you're living in a small town in Oklahoma, and there are no writers. There's no one you can ask
Mhm.
questions about what should I do. I mean, it worked out at the end, but law school, although I did not dislike it or law practice, that was just because I hadn't published any big best-selling novels yet, and I had to pay the bills. So I practiced law. But after the books took off, I let that go. Not immediately. And here's a cautionary tale to any aspiring writers over there. You don't quit your day job the first second you have an intimation of success. That can turn out to be a disastrously bad call. But after I had had six books that did, well, and I began to see, it'd make better sense to to write two books a year and forget about the law practice. And for a while, I have to admit, you know how law firms work, that you've got to be there for a while until you're up for partner. It was a 7-year track where I was. So if I'd quit before then, I would have always been wondering, well, I wonder would I have ever made partner? So I had to stick
Mhm.
around for that. Then after I made partner, I started thinking, okay, why am I here now? Because
Mm.
I probably should be doing something else and pursue my own dream. And that's what I did.
Wow. Okay. So you were 7 when you realized you wanted to be a writer and you read pretty much all your life. I'm kind of curious, was there a moment where you first thought, okay, I want to do this for a living. I want to be a storyteller. Was there any inciting incident or something that triggered this?
Just intelligence or education would be a better word. I mean,
Hmm.
my mom says that I was saying I was going to be a writer at age 7. So you don't have to believe me. Take her word for it. She's 97 now and sharp as a tack. And, she remembers it very well. Before that, I was saying I wanted to be a librarian, but there was that one major magic epiphanal moment when young Bill suddenly realized these books aren't just spontaneously generated and they show up in the library or the bookstore. Somebody writes this stuff. Like this is somebody's job. And I thought, well, that's the job I want. That sounds way better to me than anything else I'd ever heard of. And, that only increased as I got older and realized it's more than just a job and it's more than just making money. It's who do you want to hang out with? What people do you want to spend the rest of your life with? And I love artists. I like writers in particular. I think you know
Hmm.
this too. Writers are my favorite people on earth. And I think it's important that we stick together and have each other's backs. And so
Yes.
I decided I was going to be a writer.
Yeah, I love writers because, and that's something too where I pivoted from, a corporate career to writing and realized these are my people. Who knew, and there's not that competition. It's very supportive, very uplifting
Yes.
community. I love it. Um, okay, so take us back to when you first wrote your first book.
Hmm.
What was the journey like, and how does that compare from then to now in terms of the publication landscape?
Well, technically, the first book I wrote was a book called The Code of Buddyhood. I'm sure it's back there somewhere. But anyway, that was not, however, the first book I published. The first book I published was Primary Justice. Code was my attempt at doing a, more serious literary novel. And like I said, it was published, but nobody was interested back in the late 80s when I was peddling that. And I thought, well, maybe something that has a more clear market. I'll try a mystery. I didn't feel like I knew enough science to write science fiction. I certainly wasn't qualified to write romance, but mystery, I thought I can handle that. I like the puzzle aspect, fooling people. You think it's one thing and it turns out to be another. And I said it in a law firm because that's where I was. That was the environment I knew something about. And so I wrote that. And of course, that's the one that Random House, the Ballantine imprint, picked up on. and gave me in effect a 4 book contract because they wanted that to be the first book in what was going to be a series of books featuring my young lawyer protagonist Ben Kincaid. And they picked up the Code of Buddyhood too and put it out in a different. It's called the Available Press. I'm sure it doesn't exist anymore, but at the time that was where they put more classical or literary stuff like that. Primary Justice was the one that hit, though. That came out about Christmas of '91. Did better than I expected, I can tell you that, and probably better than the publisher did too, since the first printing was about 25,000 copies. But at the end of 6 months, we'd sold about 500,000 of them. They went back to press 8 times in the first 3 months. So suddenly I had a hit on my hands, and people were asking me when the next book was going to be ready, which was a pleasant change of pace to the previous many years when nobody could care less what I was writing. This was better.
Awesome. So you had many rejections before for
Hundreds.
hundreds. Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you find your agent and what was that process like back then?
It's about the same thing because, again, we're pre-internet, but I had a copy of the Writer's Market, this big, thick book that's got all these agents in it. And I'd already been through and been rejected by everybody who was listed in the mystery department or anything like that. I was literally down to the footnotes at this point, trying to get anybody I could to represent me. And I finally got a positive, a thumbs up phone call from Esther Perkins, wonderful woman, no longer with us. Even at that time, she had retired. She'd been in New York, but she'd retired to Childs, Maryland. And she got my stuff in the mail and she liked it. And she said, well, I'll represent you. And she did. And within 3 months later, she'd sold those 4 books to, a Random House imprint. So, long trek to agent, short trek from agent to publisher,
Yeah.
which again, perseverance is everything. It would have been so easy to quit. I just can't get an agent. There was no WriterCon I could go to back then. There was, I didn't know it. I just kept at it until eventually, this is what I tell people at WriterCon too, eventually you've got the right book in the right place at the right time, and that's when you sell your first book. But you can't expect it to happen overnight because it probably won't.
Yeah. So how come you didn't give up? I mean, so it's so easy, like you said, to have given up after 100 rejections or so, but you just kept going.
I think it's like anything else you might do. And I think there are a lot of fine jobs and professions and arts people can go into, but this is the one I wanted to. And if it's something hard, if it's something unusual, it's probably not going to happen overnight. You've just got to stick with it. I mean, let's face it, there was a reason why all that stuff I was putting in the mail was getting rejected, right? It wasn't very good. But the more I wrote, the better I got, and the better I got. And eventually, my writing, I think, was at the point where it was semi-publishable and hadn't been before. And you put that with the right combination of events, an agent who's interested. She mailed this to my first editor, such a wonderful guy, Joe Blades. She'd never sold anything to him before, but she'd met him at a writers conference in Beaumont, Texas, and stayed in touch. And she said, well, he does mysteries. Maybe he'd like this. And who'd have thought he actually did? He liked my dialogue, he said. He liked the way men and women related to each other. And I don't remember what else, but he bought the books. And so I was off and running.
Oh my goodness, Bill, that's amazing. So do you ever read your old works, your previous, published works, and then compare it to how you are as a writer today and think, wow, I've come so far? Or did you always just were amazing at the very beginning?
Well, it's not the last one, but as for do I ever go back and look at my old work? That would be absolutely never. Never once. I don't even want to. I think it would probably be horrifying. I like to think I've gotten better over the years. I do think my approach and style, and I mean, it depends on the book because don't write every book the same way, but I like to think I've progressed. Only time I can think of when I looked at an old book, I was speaking to some high school students, and the high school had bought everyone in the senior class a copy of Primary Justice, which I
Mm.
thought was above and beyond. So, at that point, how can you say no to speaking there? But they'd chosen the first one in the series because they were trying to get their kids to read more, and they thought, give them a fun, popular book, and it's the first in the series. Maybe they'll keep reading. So to go speak to these kids, I had to pull that book up and started reading it. It was just appalling. I remembered everything that I thought, oh man, I should have changed that. And where's all this profanity coming from? And the answer is my publisher, by the way, not me. And no, I'm never going. Maybe if there was some point in retirement, I could revise everything. I know there are things I changed. If nothing else, just the language we use and the way we talk about things. We've become more sensitive about things. And I don't think I was insensitive at the beginning, but for instance, the people who helped lawyers in their firm back in 1991 would have been secretaries. We don't use that word so much today. We say assistants or something like that, and rightly so. But I didn't know that back then. So I could make changes like that. But when would I ever rather do that than write a new book? I think
Yeah,
never. So that's
yeah,
probably not going to happen.
yeah. Do you have a favorite book baby out of all of your book babies?
Oh, the other than the one we're going to talk about today,
Yes.
the Florentine Poet, I think, is my
Mm.
best novel. That's probably not the right answer. I should say the first book in some series that went on forever, but I think the Florentine Poet was one that I have. If I had to have one engraved on my tombstone, that's the one I'd pick. I just thought that turned out really well, and it's a book that's very personal, and not that it's about me, but you can tell that it's discussing things that I care about. And it's poetry. How can you not like that? And it's Florence, for Pete's sake. So I
I love
like
it.
that one.
I love it. Well, let's switch over to the Superman Wars. Let's talk about your latest endeavor here because that I feel like it was a very Herculean effort.
Thank you.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey in terms of writing this book? Like, why did you even start writing this book?
Well, first, I should say up front that I love comic books. I read comic books like everything else. They had those at that library in Midwest City too. And I still do. I mean, I read all kinds of things, but I've got a soft spot in my heart, especially for Superman, the first and greatest of the superheroes. But I was writing a book called Justice for All. I think that may be right over my head right now as I speak that. That was a Daniel Pike legal thriller. And I kind of wanted to touch on this conflict between art and commerce and ended up, first it was movies. Then I thought, no, comic books will be more fun. And to research it, I started looking into what happened to Jerry Siegel and his artist friend Joe Shuster way back when to get ideas for the book. And I knew a little bit about it before, but just scraping the surface. And what little I saw was alternately either horrifying or confusing. This creator rights battle over Superman went on for almost 70 years, for Pete's sake. And as
Mm.
a lawyer, I thought, what takes 70 years? Why wasn't it wrapped up quicker? And I couldn't find a good discussion of that anywhere. I think it's often difficult for people who haven't been through law school, aren't used to reading pleadings and motions and appeals and figure out, well, now we're going to send it back to the trial court. And you're like, what? I don't understand. Why is everything going back and forth? So I thought that was something that I could do, maybe explain the litigation, but that would be a boring book. So I had to find out about the people. And eventually that kind of metamorphized into being essentially a biography of Jerry Siegel, the guy who came up with the idea for Superman as a teenager in Cleveland, Ohio during the Great Depression. It came to him one night and, he's the writer. So he's the one I could relate to in this story.
Hmm. So, what were some of the interesting things or surprising things that you found, or maybe even what are some of the challenging things that
Mhm.
you experienced in doing your research on this book?
Well, Siegel's childhood is, not that I've ever created Superman or anything even close, but I could relate to so much of what I found out about his childhood. He was also precocious, not only reading, but writing. I mean, he was sending things out. He was getting stuff published when he was still a one-digit age.
Mm.
He kept at it.
Oh,
He wrote for his school paper. He'd send letters to the pulp magazines, the science fiction magazines that he loved. And
yeah.
he decided he was going to be a writer, so he's sending things off. He finally, in the 11th grade, comes up with the idea for Superman. There's a lot more to it than that. It went through several variants and revisions, but eventually he hits on the guy from the planet Krypton that we all know and love, and he got his best friend Joe Shuster to draw it, spent years trying to get that published as a newspaper strip because during the 30s that was where the big money was. Newspaper strips were hugely popular. I mean, so popular that during a newspaper strike, Mayor LaGuardia in New York read the funnies aloud on the radio so kids wouldn't miss out on this day's supplement. And Jerry knew people were making real money doing that. And that's what he wanted for Superman. And he spent several years. He was always the agent for the two. He was the one who relentlessly put things in the mail and got rejected, and he put them back in the mail. And he did that until he'd been through pretty much every newspaper syndicate there was. And only at that time did he think about doing it for a comic book. I should explain that comic books in the modern form didn't exist until 1935, and even then they were considered kind of, scruffy and a low rent kind of thing, not where you'd get rich, you would think. But he had been doing some work for comic books for a guy called Major Nicholson, who is a fascinating figure, former cavalry officer, writer, and starts this company because he thinks this merging of words and pictures to tell a story could be really powerful. He sees them as being a lot like the pulp magazines, except, with lots of pictures. And Jerry does work for him and likes him and eventually agrees to let his outfit publish Superman. What he doesn't know is that another group of people, another company headed by a man named Harry Donenfeld with his assistant, Harry Leibowitz, an accountant and business manager, were scheming to take over the company and had finally completed that. And I'm not exaggerating, days before Superman is published. So Jerry suddenly finds himself in bed with people he doesn't even know, but everything he learns about them he doesn't like. I mean,
Mm.
Harry used to brag about his mob connections. He was pals with Frank Costello. He was a rum runner during Prohibition, and then he got into publishing. He was indicted twice for pornography. And his primary interest in the comic books were that this is something he could use his publishing machine to publish, but it wasn't what they called a Sing Sing job, meaning it wouldn't land you in prison afterwards. That was his whole end. He looked at the cover of the first Superman comic and said, "A guy lifting a car over his head? Yeah, sure." But they did it anyway. And Superman was an instant sensation, huge hit. Harry Donenfeld is a millionaire within a year. There are more than 200 Superman licensing projects. He's at the World's Fair in 1940. He's in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. But in order to get him published, Jerry has had to sign a release, which states, in one of the clauses toward the bottom, that the rights to all the characters in this story go to the company. So he
Mm.
fulfilled his dream of seeing it published, but he lost control, which turned out to be tragic.
Yeah. Okay. With that,
Yeah.
I mean, my heart hurts for him. Um,
Oh, it is tragic, and it just goes
yeah.
on and on. In the book, you can read. I mean, I took the whole. I'm not taking through all the letters, but there are snippets from the correspondence between Jack Leibowitz and Jerry. It's just 10 years of abuse. I mean,
Mm.
they are mean, they're cruel, clearly taking advantage of the fact that Jerry and Joe are younger and have no business experience. I should explain that Jerry lost his father when he was 17.
Mm.
He didn't have an agent, unlike me. He didn't have a lawyer. Joe's father was an elevator operator at a local hospital. There was no one they could talk to for advice. They didn't have a WriterCon. They didn't have anybody they could go to for help. And
Yeah.
boy, did that end up hurting them in even the short run. I mean, they did make some money in the early years, and during the Depression, that was a great thing. But the loss of control turns out to be absolutely painful and fatal. Jerry is
Yeah.
drafted in 1943 for World War II, spends a couple years overseas serving his country as a journalist. You wouldn't, I don't think you'd want to see Jerry on the front lines. That would not work well. And while he's serving his country, the company takes over the whole Superman operation, even hiring Joe to become in-house. So Jerry comes home to find one, lots of debt because his wife hasn't been paying the taxes, and two, somebody else has taken control of Superman and have even published a script for a character called Superboy that he did not sell them, did not they didn't have the right or authority to publish it, and they did it anyway.
Mm.
So, you know what happens. Jerry ends up suing in 1947. He, for the most part, as to Superman, loses the lawsuit, but more to the point, they fire him immediately so he can't even work on his own character. And as if that weren't enough, they strip Jerry and Joe's name from the feature, their creator credit. Before it always said by Siegel and Schuster, but they took their credits away. Even when they reprinted old stories that had appeared before, they'd cover over the names. So they didn't get credit for own work. You know,
What a
we could
nightmare.
go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's what a nightmare, Bill.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could
Um,
argue all night about the legalities. He did sign the
yeah.
release, and I don't. I think I just when I was writing this book, I thought, Jerry, why couldn't I have represented you? I could have won this lawsuit, but he was
Well,
totally outlawyered, and it
mhm.
didn't go well for him.
But I was going to say, to play devil's advocate, he did sign the release, and
Absolutely.
and to that respect, like, how do you fight something like that? But neither
Well,
here
here's what
nor
I would
there.
have said, Amy, since you asked. Because, you hear this myth a lot that Jerry and Joe sold the rights to Superman for $130. That's not really true. What
Mm,
happened was they sold a 13-page story for $10 a page. That's where the 130 comes from, but that wasn't for the rights to the characters. That was just to publish that story.
mm,
The release did also state, and by this signature, you sign over the rights to all the characters, blah, blah, blah. But what was the consideration for that, to use a legal term? Meaning, if you give something away, you're supposed to get something back. What did they get for that in addition? I would say nothing. And that's
mhm.
how I would argue, would have at least tried to get the whole thing rescinded. Or I would have said there was fraud because they withheld so much information from Jerry about how well the character was doing. But that's not what happened. What happened was they got fired, their names were removed, and Jerry spends the next 2.5 or more decades scrambling to survive, which is really tough to say, well, I'm the creator of Superman, except, yeah, no, my name's not on it anymore. And, I'm not supposed to talk about that. He did work. It's not like he was sitting around doing nothing. He was constantly writing stories, wrote more than 200 comic book stories during that time, but never could make enough money to get in a safe or a level playing field. His
Yeah.
daughter was born in 1951, and you know, as I can testify, daddies love their daughters. They want to do everything they can, and he wasn't able to. And I think that really tore Jerry apart. Some of the
Mhm.
correspondence he sends in 51 and then 53, mostly to the comic book company or the guys or everybody they knew at one point, some of it is pretty extreme. Pretty out there. I think if this were happening today, we would probably say that Jerry had a nervous breakdown. And it was his wife, Joanne, who really pulled, kept him steady enough and pulled him through that difficult period. He said later, I found his unpublished manuscript. He'd written about 100 pages of a autobiography before he passed. And he says in that he was completely suicidal at that point, and I believe it. I mean, can you imagine? You've
Yeah.
By the 50s, George Reeves is on television like every week playing Superman, but do you see a creator credit for Jerry and Joe? You certainly do not. Apparently on that TV show, Superman just sprang out of nowhere.
I could tell you're very passionate about this topic.
Yeah,
And I think as you were doing your research, I can only imagine you getting more engrossed in it and more like advocating for Jerry. And I would love to have you do a reading from the Superman Wars if you are inclined. And I hope there's a good
sure.
and happy ending because,
There is actually a happier ending than you would expect. I'm sorry, can you hear me all right? But I'm
yes,
not going to give that away. You got to get the book if you want to know about that.
yes.
I will say this, if I can, a lot of people, if they're old enough, remember there was a lot of publicity in 1975 when Jerry and Joe were finally given by the company a small pension. And I mean small, it was 20,000 a year. It was basically what they were paying their secretaries, what we'd now call assistants at the time. But it was something, it meant nobody was going to starve to death. And that was good. But if you're remembering that, readers out there, and you're thinking, oh, I already know how this story ends, you so don't. There's 50 more years of conflict after that. That is where the worm starts to turn slightly, but it is far from the end of the story.
Oh my goodness. Okay. The stage
Okay,
is yours.
reading. Well, I don't know why I chose this, but it's too late to change, so I'll just go with this. And if you're even older, you'll remember, or perhaps if you're a comic fan, you've read about the 1950s Frederick Wortham in a book called Seduction of the Innocent. I mean, people had been complaining about comic books from the get-go, as always happens. They were new, and some of them were a little extreme for young readers, but of course, they were not always only being read by 8-year-old boys, something that took people a while to figure out. And people were saying they caused this, that, or problem, but Wortham was a double threat because, for one thing, he was an educated, talented psychologist who'd done good work. He'd studied under Freud, for Pete's sake, but for some reason he started doing articles for women's magazines and started to build a name. So he leaned in hard. And by the time of this book, he's saying comic books cause juvenile delinquency, which is preposterous. I mean, he never had he'd say, well, I've been to the juvie hall and talked to those kids. Every single one of them read comic books. Well, that's just a sign of how popular comic books were in the 50s. They probably all drank milk too, but that doesn't mean the milk turned them into baby criminals. And so he's
Mhm.
saying all these things and particularly attacking Superman, who he sees as sort of a super Nazi. And you can imagine how Jerry Siegel, Jewish, of course, felt about that. He'd been attacked during World War II in German publications,
Mhm.
by Goebbels and other Nazi propaganda artists who, saw Superman practically wrapped in the flag, right, as American propaganda. Anyway, so this is the 50s, and this is Jerry reacting to that book, Seduction of the Innocent. Jerry had seen comic books criticized literally since their inception, but he hated Seduction of the Innocent. Chapter titles in the book included I Want to Be a Sex Maniac and Homicide at Home. Wortham blamed comics, including superhero comics, for the rise in juvenile delinquency. Jerry knew that domestic crime had increased after the war, but he couldn't believe these fanciful stories had anything to do with it. Jerry particularly disliked Wortham's comments about Superman, and this is a quote from Wortham's book. We should, I suppose, be thankful that the S on his chest is not an SS. The very children whose unruly behavior I would want to prescribe psychotherapy in an anti Superman direction have been nourished, or rather poisoned, by the endless repetition of Superman stories. Elsewhere, he wrote, Superman has long been recognized as a symbol of violent race superiority. This
Mhm.
was a big surprise to the Jewish man who invented him. He was particularly distraught when Wortham calls Superman fascistic or, other Nazi type insinuations, which obviously weren't true. Jerry was trying to have fun and set a good example for children and people trying to turn it into something toxic. I think it's worth noting that in Jerry's era of Superman, in that very first story in Action Comics #1, there are no supervillains, there are no aliens. Jerry was basically reversing the standard science fiction formula, if you know what I mean. Flash Gordon, for instance, he's an Earth guy, but he goes off to the planet Mongo to fix things up. Here it's the reverse. Superman's a Kryptonian who comes to Earth, but he deals with our problems and helps us out. In that first issue, Jerry called him the champion of the weak and oppressed. And that's what he is in those early stories. He's basically an FDR New Deal reformer. He takes on the problems so rampant during that troubled Depression era. He takes on a wife beater in the first issue, and a woman who's about to be wrongfully executed for a murder she didn't commit. He saves Lois from kidnapping. He stops war profiteers. He was basically this, New Deal crusader that Jerry had created, tackles prejudice, the anti-Semitism that was so rampant in that era. He's taking on the real problems. That changes after other people are directing the company, and then we see more of the super villains, and sometimes that's fun too. But that was not Jerry's original idea at all.
Yeah.
So imagine how he must have felt about this guy trashing his books in the 50s. For whatever it's worth, here's a PS that you may not know. By the 70s, Frederick Wortham repented. He even showed up at the San Diego Comic-Con and basically apologized and had a new book that that he was offering about fanzines, basically saying that this community or culture that has arisen about comic books, adults who collect them and take it seriously and want to know about the artists and the writers behind them, that was creating a very healthy community.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of stuff is still with us today. Comic books were new then, but by the
Yeah,
50s, people were saying television are destroying our youth. Then movies are destroying our youth.
that's
Now it's
true.
video games are destroying our youth. You know what? People might get ideas from that stuff, but video games are not causing criminals any more than comic books do. People are. And
Yeah.
until we figure out what's making people go down these dark paths, we're not going to be able to cure it. But anyway,
Good. Yes, absolutely. 100% I agree with what you just said. So what do you think, what do you want your readers to take away after they read your book?
well, I want them to see it as I see it, as an artist's or author's rights conflict. It's about creator rights, an issue that is still very much with us today. I think this book will be interesting to people whether they care about comic books or they don't. Remember, Jerry Siegel was the first American writer to sue his publisher.
Mhm.
His Superman battle was the first writer-oriented creator or copyright battle in the United States, and it goes on for decades. But people now are benefiting from his work. Jerry didn't benefit enough. It's a great story that in 1951, when Jerry's sending out all those awful letters, he thought the community, the creative community, would rally around him. But they so did not because, they were afraid of not getting work. Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, both great comic creators, they sent a letter to the company that we now call DC Comics, sort of saying, we just want you to know we don't support him or any of this stuff.
Mm.
Decades later, Jack Kirby's family will be suing Marvel Comics, making some of the same arguments Jerry did decades before, even using the same lawyer that the Siegel family had used, but somebody had to go first, and
Mhm.
that was Jerry Siegel. But these rights are still important. We still have copyright battles, as you know. And in today's world where we've got the internet and we've got people training AI, whether you're writing or painting or creating content for YouTube, you have got to protect yourself. Take it from Jerry Siegel. Don't be the next Superman Wars. Get an agent, get a lawyer, or get friends, which, of course, is something we always emphasize at WriterCon. I want people to come and, of course, learn what they need to know to write and publish successfully. But one of the most important aspects of the conference, I think, is just meeting other people, other
Mm.
writers, or other people in the industry who share your sense of what's important and your artistic dreams. Everybody needs a street team, right? Or a support team, or later maybe
Amen.
beta readers, somebody to bounce ideas off. Jerry didn't have that. He was working in a void, but you don't have to. Don't let what happened to him happen to you.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd want them to take away. It's a cautionary tale, and take care of yourself so this doesn't happen to you.
So I definitely want to talk about WriterCon, and while it's in my head, I'm going to ask you, Bill, to find us an entertainment lawyer and a literary lawyer to attend WriterCon and give a presentation. Because I feel like, we writers, we're in our little bubble. We don't think about the business aspect of things. The finances, the legality of everything.
Hmm.
And WriterCon is the perfect place to really sink your teeth into that and think about those kinds of things.
Oh,
Um,
that's a great idea.
Yes, and so let's talk about WriterCon. Like, how did it come about, and why in the world? That's a crazy idea, but you did it, and it's thriving today.
Yeah, yeah, it's grown every year. You've seen
Mhm.
it. It continues to gather steam. I'm aware that I've been very fortunate, and there's a lot more to any career than just good luck. But a little luck now and then doesn't hurt anything. And I am aware that I have been very fortunate to I mean, my first book was published in 91, for Pete's sake. I've done 67 of them. And I just think this is my way of paying it forward, if you will, or giving a little bit back, making it possible for maybe the next generation of 7-year-olds, probably several generations at this point, but people who are feeling the same urge to write, the same desire to publish, but don't know how to go about it. Well, I'm hoping WriterCon, the conference, and its other programs will make it a little bit easier for the next generation of writers. That's my goal, anyway.
What was the first WriterCon like? Because it wasn't called WriterCon then, right?
No, we didn't call that at WriterCon until I'm going to guess 8 years ago, nine, something like that. It was actually Renee Gutteridge who came up. We were brainstorming names, and mine were terrible. And she said WriterCon, and I said, "That's it."
She's
That
not
was
only
so
pretty, but she's
perfect.
smart. So yes,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah.
Um,
Anyway, so this is our 19th or 20th year, I think. And you're right, under different names and in different places, but 20th anniversary, I think, for the writing conference.
yeah. So the very first WriterCon, how many people did you have attending?
We had a pretty good turnout the first year. Nothing like we do now, but it was actually pretty good because we got good coverage in the newspaper. And it's been up and down. I did it at a local university, as you probably also know, for a few years, and I loved being in the university environment and having university support and money. But it was getting big, and I thought we needed to expand. I wanted to make it multi-day. I thought we needed a holiday weekend, and they didn't want to do that. So that's when I took it out on its own to a hotel, and that's when I called up Renee, because she was also doing a conference, I know, focusing on the inspirational Christian books and whatnot, that sector of the market, which I knew nothing about. So I thought, this is a match made in heaven. Let's combine conferences and see what happens. And it turned out to be spectacular. It's been growing every year since.
Yeah, and the rest is history. But it's not just a conference. You've got
Nope.
like retreats, cruises,
Yeah.
podcasts, newsletters, magazines. What else?
That's true. We just finished the cruise and we've got a retreat coming up in July. The retreat is more of a small group gathering. I keep it to, well, it depends on how many instructors I have, but I like to be able to break it down into small groups. And by small, I mean 6 or 7, something like that, because that way I can read people's work, and
Mhm.
give people actual feedback. I mean, lectures and all have their place, but the time when I really feel like I'm being semi-helpful is when I can actually, point at the piece of paper and say, here's how I would have done this, or why don't you try this, and give people specific feedback. And the retreat is at this beautiful Canebrake Resort, not too far from Tulsa. So, we have classes, and then you can go back to your cabin or go for a walk, or walk around the pond or whatever, go back and
Mhm.
write and absorb some of the stuff that you've been learning in this great environment. And then we get back again at dinner, get back together again at dinner and talk. And it's just, I should actually sit down and count how many people have come out of those retreats and not only published a book, but published a book like within the next year, because it's a bunch of people. And we also have the newsletter that goes out from Substack. That's totally free. So just go to Substack and search for WriterCon, and you can find that without any trouble at all.
Wow,
Oh,
that's
and
amazing.
did I say this? The website is writercon.com, as you might guess. And the big conference, it's always Labor Day weekend, which this year is September 4th through 7th. So check out the website and, see if that might be interest you or the friend you have that dreams about being a writer. They might have a turning point in their whole creative life over the course of a weekend. And what could be better than that, right?
I love it. Would you be willing to offer any promo codes for our listeners if they would like to sign up and register for WriterCon?
Oh, that would be such a good idea. Yes.
Okay. Well, we
Here
can
you
always put it in the
go.
show notes. No pressure right now, but
Oh no, I could tell you what it's going to be. It's going to be WC75. And if you put that in when you register, it'll knock $75 off the price. And let me also just say while I'm thinking about it that right now, as we're recording this, we have the early bird prices up on the website, but those are going to end at the end of May. So if you're thinking about doing it, register now. Use the
okay.
promo code, get the early bird price. You'll be in really great shape.
Perfect. I love it. Okay, so you also do a podcast.
Yes, there's a
And
podcast too. How did I not think of that? Yes.
I'm like, you've been on Jeopardy, you've done a podcast. I'm
Yes.
like, what else have you done, Bill? But let's talk about your podcast a little bit. Like, how did
Hmm.
that get started? How many episodes have you had now?
Well, it's called WriterCon 2, and we're over 200. I think we just recorded the 211th, if I remember correctly. And I don't know how I started that, but it's turned out to be a good complement to all the other writing programs. And we get to talk about the conference too, and I hope get people interested. But we usually discuss news of the day. No, I don't mean political news, I mean news that pertains to writers, news you need to know. And then we have something like Craft Corner, which is a relatively brief but succinct section in which some published writer gives you a writing tip.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like I've done 10 books on writing too, the Red Sneaker books on writing, starting with story structure. And as you probably know, they're all relatively short. And I did that for a reason. I didn't want them to become an excuse for not writing. I wanted you to read them, take a couple hours maybe, and then you can get back to work. Same thing with Craft Corner. It's brief, it's important, but it doesn't go on forever. Then we usually interview someone, typically an author, although sometimes it's somebody else in the publishing world, and have a good time. It's a great, lively podcast. My wife Laura, who's also a writer, co-hosts, and our sound engineer Jesse, who says he never wants to write anything in his life, but he's a great sound engineer and sometimes makes some pretty brilliant and funny comments. So we have a good time.
Well, never say never, Jesse, because you never know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And you also have a publishing company, yes?
True. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, Bernhardt Books is the umbrella company. We have several different imprints under that, but that's something I started originally mostly for people I knew, friends who I thought had great books but weren't having any luck getting it published. And then during COVID, when, most people had a hard time finding work to do, Ralph was sent home from OU because you couldn't stay in the dorm anymore. And Alice works in the library and she was home. And I thought, well, you guys can help me with this publishing company since nothing else is going on. And that was a real delight. And it's just grown and grown from there. And now we publish many books a year and have several authors who are doing really well, fiction and nonfiction as well.
And this is a small indie press. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Traditional press, but small.
Traditional.
Yes.
Yes. Got it.
More
Okay.
regional, maybe. At this point, we've done more than 100 titles, so I'm going to give us regional rather
All
than
right.
small.
I love it. Okay, Bill, I'm going to give you some lightning questions. We're going to have a little bit
Uh-oh.
of fun in our last
I
few.
better sit up straight for this.
I
Okay.
know. And I'm not going to test you about Superman like Jay Hall did on the Okie Book cast. Everybody listen to the Okie Book cast. But here's my first question for you.
Okay.
Besides Superman, favorite fictional hero?
Besides Superman, you're saying?
Yes.
This is so predictable, but it's clearly Tarzan, um, who I also discovered through comic books originally. Now, of course, I've read all the books and read all the movies. I'll just say this, there's a TCM app that's Turner Classic Movies. And, if you don't have cable, you may not be able to stream the channel, but anybody can get the app. And there are always some movies resident there. And there's always a Tarzan movie, no matter what. And I'm telling you, even when you've had a bad day and things aren't going the way you want, a Tarzan movie will always make it better.
I
Even
love
the ones that aren't so hot. Who
I
cares?
agree.
It's Tarzan.
Okay. One writing rule you love to break.
Oh, that I love to break. I don't know. Do I break rules? Probably the one about staying in your lane. And you know what I mean, branding. You should stick to one thing and just do it forever. And these thrillers and the courtroom books have been very good to me, and goodness knows I've done plenty of them. But I've also taken breaks to do other things. I've written for young people. I've written a couple of historical novels that, again, are amongst my favorites. Challengers of the Dust, I can see staring at me on that screen right there. Like that one a bunch. I thought it turned out well. 3 books of poetry, which obviously did not make me rich, but got some of the best reviews I've had in my entire career. So I probably haven't done the best job of career management, and branding and building, but I didn't really want to. I wanted to write good books. And sometimes you start a book even realizing this probably won't have a big audience. But then again, who knows? When I started this book, one of my sisters, who I mentioned first, immediately said, well, who's going to want to read that? But as it turns out, people do.
Everybody. And I
Yeah.
was I was peeking on Amazon. You're doing very well on Amazon. So
I
congratulations.
know, cross fingers, because, every morning I go, because if you're a writer, going to your Amazon page it's like the crack cocaine for authors. You just keep going back and reloading the page. Maybe I've gone up 2 points or something.
Very
But as
important
of
to
this
rewind.
morning, I've still got the #1 new release flag, so I'm happy about that. Somebody's
Yeah.
got to be reading it.
Congratulations. It's beautiful. Okay, the next question for you is a book that changed your life.
Oh, I would say The Princess Bride by
Mm,
William Goldman, but let me be very cautious here because I know a lot of people have seen the movie and love the movie. I saw a list recently, maybe this morning, said that movie was the 5th most frequently rewatched movie like ever.
mm.
The book is not the same as the movie. The book is much better than the movie, and I love the movie too. I'm just saying the book is a book. And isn't the book always better? But it's very different, so be cautious. It's
Mm.
got an introduction that's totally unlike the framing device in the movie. And but if you spend some time with the movie, with the book, and you see that William Goldman, great writer and screenplay writer, wrote the screenplay for the movie too. If you see he's doing metafiction before we even had that word for it, you know, he's playing with this interchange between author and writer in really, I think, a pretty profound way. Plus, it's funny. Plus, it's sweet. I mean, why did he write this book? Ignore everything he says in the introduction about why he wrote it. None of that is true. The real reason is he had two daughters and he asked them what his next book should be about. And one of them said a princess and the other one said a bride. So you see what happened, right?
I love it. That's
Yeah.
so, yours just full of facts and answers. I love it.
Well, I've gotten a lot of good
Jeopardy
ideas from
champion.
my daughters too, so fair is fair.
Okay, two more for you. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Boy, that's hard. You know, my original plan was that I was going to write. And when I got old enough that I realized, no, you probably need to also have a job, at least in the short term, I thought, well, I'll get my PhD in English and teach. And as you know, that didn't happen. I ended up going to law school. It was quicker, among other things. And but a part of me, it's like an unchecked box, you know. I never got that PhD that I wanted. Do I need it? No. I just wanted it. And so I'm tempted to say, well, I'd go back and skip law school. But if I did that, then what would I have been writing about? It wouldn't have been primary justice, and I wouldn't have caught on to this legal thriller thing. So, I don't know. That whole path not taken thing is, I don't know. I don't really have any regrets, so I'll just leave it with that.
I love it. Okay, yay or nay? Write drunk and edit sober.
Well, that would be very bad advice for me, and I think probably for anyone. I don't believe this myth at all that, you get drunk or you get high and suddenly you have all these wonderful ideas pop. It may seem like that at the time, but then you wake up and more sober or with a hang up the next morning and look at that gibberish you wrote the next night, the night before, and think, no, that was not worth doing. Even Hemingway, for Pete's sake, woke up sober and wrote till noon because that's when the bars open. But at least there were a few hours in the morning there where he got some sober work done. And that's why we have the novels of Hemingway. I would say write loose, write
Mm.
free, first draft. Don't throw out the clutch, just write and get some words down on paper because the first draft is the hardest one. Then you go back and you can revise and start making it good. Even now, after so many books, Amy, every time I finish a first draft, I think, God, that was terrible. That's garbage. When did I forget how to write? And then you go back and find out it's not quite as bad as you remembered, and you start making it better, and then you go back again and go back again. I'm a big reviser. I don't like to let books go until I think they're as good as they can possibly be. That was a problem with this one. I was still revising in early January, and my publisher was just like, let it go, Bill. We got to get this in print. But something happened, some Superman thing. I got to get that in the book, but no.
Who's your editor?
At the Permuted Press, I've got a wonderful guy. Jamie is such a good. Did I say Jamie? I'm slipping. Jeremy is
Mm,
such a good editor. He was all over this book and enthusiastic about it from the get-go. He's also a very good line editor and just a really good guy. I feel. My first ever editor that I mentioned before, Joe Blades, has retired. But Jeremy is very much in the same spirit. I really enjoy working with him.
love it. Great shout out. Okay, so what's next for you? What else are you working on?
Oh, well, that's the question I asked Jeremy many months ago when I thought Superman was semi-done and it was getting pre-orders. And I knew it was up for pre-order, but I thought, who's going to pre-order a book? Pay for it and you can't get it till April? That doesn't work. But apparently people were. And they asked me what I'd like to do next because they have the right of first refusal on my next book. And I gave them several suggestions. They wanted some other kind of wars that I could tackle. So they picked, anyway, you've already guessed this, it's going to be the Batman Wars. And believe it or not, in the Batman world, there is a story possibly even worse and
Mm,
far less well known than the Jerry Siegel story. So, one more deep dive into the comic book world, and then I'm on to something else.
I love it. When is that going to come out, you think?
They've told me, I think it's May of 2027. I
Okay.
think. Don't hold me to that. We're still ways off, but I
All
think
right.
this, I mean, I'm still writing it. I'm going on a trip this
Yeah.
weekend to a library in Indiana to do some research. So it's not done yet.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about or promote, Bill, while we have you?
I think we've promoted everything there is to promote. I will just say again, go to WriterCon or some other conference. If you're some kind of creative, some kind of artist, you're creating work of any kind, make sure you know what you need to know to protect yourself. Don't ever let anybody publish your work without your name on it like they did to Jerry Siegel. Like I said, we could argue about the legalities. As you pointed out, he did sign the piece of paper, but removing someone's name from their work, that is just morally and ethically wrong. That is indefensible. In some countries, it would be illegal, but I'm not sure it is here. So, writers, take care of yourself. Don't trust other people's better nature. You may find yourself disappointed. Take care of yourself. Make friends in the business who can help you.
Absolutely, 1000%. And those are wise words. So listeners, listen to Bill. He knows so much. He's been around for so long, and I'm just always impressed by whatever is coming out. I get my news from WriterCon, by the way. Whether
Great.
it be your podcast
Oh,
or
there's
on
a
the Facebook
Facebook page too,
page.
right? Did we say
Yes,
that? And that we can post stuff every day there, so you never miss out on any writer stories.
I love it. Bill, thank you so much for spending the hour with me and with our listeners. It's been a very cool conversation. So thank you, sir, for joining us on Quixotic Heights.
Thanks for having me, Amy. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. So that's it for today, listeners. Well, from the evolution of iconic heroes to the responsibilities of storytelling and shaping culture, today's episode reminds us that stories are more than entertainment. They are reflections of who we are and who we aspire to be. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, share with a fellow reader or writer, and continue the conversation with us. At Quixotic Heights, we believe in the courage to dream, the power to create, and the resilience to rise again and again. Until next time, please keep reaching for your own Quixotic Heights and make sure you sign up for WriterCon. We'll see you in September. And it was WC75, I think, was the code, and get that for the early bird before the end of May, right, Bill?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much and have a blessed day.
Thanks. Bye now.